Happy Wednesday, friend. So good to see you. I hope you've been having a beautiful start to the week. I missed you last week, but I'm back with you today, which I'm really excited about. If you haven't already, if it's your first time around here, say hi in the chat while you will be listening to hopefully a very dynamic conversation with me asking a lot of questions. I don't want to take all the fun away from you. So if you have a question or a tip or a comment or something that you just think this would be really helpful for other humans to know, please don't keep it to yourself. We are in the sharing is caring business over here. So please add it to the live chat. Get your fingers going so that we can make sure that you have a very big seat at the table as well. If you are listening to this on your favorite podcast network while you walk the dog or fold laundry or take a walk, no worries. Your questions still count. Your comments still matter. So feel free to drop me a line on whatever social media network is your preference, and I would be happy to follow up. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're walking the dog, whatever comment or question that you had, so I can make sure that we get to it. Big hi to Jim and Catherine and Jeff and Mike for being the very, very first one to join us today. I also would like to say a big hi to James and Shelby and Stacy and Javier. Oh, gosh, I just love when we have so many smart, interesting, amazing humans in a room, digitally or otherwise, because I feel like that is really where all the magic happens. So thank you for being a part of all of that magic, Isabel and Ram. It's great to see you. When I was thinking about kind of what topic as we round out September, which is so mind-blowing. I cannot believe that next week is October already. It blows my mind. But as I was thinking about like, okay, October, November, December, like the last 3 months, we're in the last like Q4, the last push. I have this thought of, really, I think that everybody has this mindset of like push, push, push till the end of the year. But I really wanted to take a step back and really kind of phrase it as during that push, whether it's the holidays or just work is crazy or whatever it might be, you might have times alone in a dark room where you're like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Like this is like whatever it is I'm doing, work, life, whatever, this is hard. I am in a very hard spot. And so when I was thinking about that and really kind of coming up with this like theory of like, what do we do when things get hard? And we're, hope is not a strategy, as my husband likes to say, or my friend Cody says, hard, you got to choose your hard, whatever that hard thing is. And no one's coming to save you. You really got to look at saving yourself. And it was at that exact moment that, I happened to look down at my bookshelf, which is in my office. And I saw a brand new book that I had just placed there last month. And I was like, this is where this book is going to come in handy. And that book is all about being a self-reliant leader and what it looks like to go through gritty, hard things, sometimes on purpose, because on the other side of them, that's where your strength, that's where your leadership is really going to develop and come into play. And so that book was written by my good friend, Jan Rutherford, who is joining us today. So please help me welcome Jan to our coffee chat.
Hey, Kim.
So good to see you. How are you?
Fireworks. Holy cow. What a great setup. What a great introduction. Thank you.
Well, I really did mean it. And I really feel like as we get into Q4, there's going to be a lot of people that might be joining us today who are leaning in and saying, yes, Jan, like things are hard. And I'm trying to be this leader, or I'm trying to be the best employee, or I'm trying to be a fearless entrepreneur. And things are hard. And what do I do with that?
Yeah. Well, I think, gosh, I've seen it more now lately than ever. Things got kind of hard right in the middle of the pandemic. And I think it seems like it's similar right now, that people are stressed out. We know from the Gallup survey that just came out, people are stressed out. People are lonely quite a bit. People don't, the friend circles have kind of shrunk for a lot of people over the years. And we're all thinking that, gosh, if I if I'm just a little bit busier, if I just work a little bit harder, things will slow down, and they won't. And there's a couple books on that bookshelf about a good life and Stoic philosophy, and so many of them basically point to the fact that a good life isn't something in the future. A good life has to be defined today, and what that means. And I'm always reminded by my friend Joel Peterson, the former chairman of JetBlue, who said 24 hours is more than enough time every single day. And if it's not, the priorities are a little bit misplaced.
I love that saying, and it's so true because we all have the same 24 hours.
Right.
So that is another thing as well. It's not some uneven playing field. We all have the same 24 hours. And what I was really curious about is, and this is kind of like my own selfish question. I already told everybody that they can ask questions, but until then, I'm asking my own selfish questions, which is, while you've been doing this work your whole career, obviously from being a Green Beret to kind of leading these crucible leadership experiences to your work on stages and speaking and consulting. Why now, after especially the last 13 years when we've really been knee deep in the teamwork and consulting work and speaking engagements, did you think a book? Because I look at a book and I'm like, wow, talk about a mountain to climb. I mean, every single friend I've had that has written a book kind of gets through the end and they were like, that was no joke. They were like, I had one friend I'm thinking of in particular where she literally said, I will never do this again.
Yeah.
So hard. So I'm curious, what was that an actionable thing on your part of I know that it's this really hard thing, but I'm going to do it on purpose?
Yeah. Well, so many people that do what I do have said, I wrote a book, I'm done. I'll do online courses, I'll do other things because nobody writes a book to get famous or to make tons of money. I mean, the books that go crazy are rare. I mean, really rare. What happened is I was talking to a really great publisher friend in Portland by the name of Todd Satterson. And I said, hey, I think I kind of want to write a book. And he's a publisher. And he goes, why? And I said, well, I want to have a bigger impact. And he asked really a great question. He said, Jan, haven't you already helped a lot of people? The undertone to that question was, what's enough? Which is a really great question all the time. What's enough? And my response was, the crucible doesn't scale. I can't take thousands of people on expeditions with military veterans and executives. I can't, you can't do it. And I said, I want to get a foundation down of what we've learned after 10 years and 25 expeditions all over the world. And as a baseline of all the lessons, the predictable things that happen on a crucible that parallel the business world. And so I found a great partner, Jackie Jordan, to help me write that, and really different perspective. She's of a different generation, a different gender. We both are veterans. And, we came up with this book that we hope really helps a lot of people and also sets a foundation by which other people in the future can build on the whole idea of a self-reliant leadership crucible.
And I'm curious, like you just said, you've had 10 years of experience working with really, whether it's a big team, a small team, high-powered executives from Fortune 500 to, smaller teams. And I'm curious, over 10 years, all different walks of life, all different types of companies, what has been one or two, or maybe even three of the things that you see that's kind of common, no matter where that team came from, what gender that team is, what age bracket that team is, just some of those universal lessons that whether you are a 65-year-old guy in Milwaukee or a 25-year-old girl from Chicago, you're experiencing?
That's a great question, Kim. I knew you would ask great questions, and it's such a delight. So here's what happens on almost every crucible. There's always somebody that's in some situation is a weak link. It could be physically. It could be, 24 hours a day with people. I don't get any downtime. I'm an introvert. I can't do that. It might be they didn't want to show any vulnerability, but there's always a moment where the group realizes, the team, hey, we've got a weak link here, and the team can only go as fast, literally and figuratively, as the slowest person. So when that happens, it actually makes the team stronger. We've had some teams where everybody was really squared away and really good, and then it became kind of this competition, and the team didn't really gel. And out there, it's really easy to see who might be struggling. In our hybrid remote world, it's really hard to know. A 15-minute stand-up once a week doesn't give you insight into people's character and how they're dealing with adversity. But out there, we can see it. So the lesson is always, you've got to slow down to speed up. You have to spend your time with people. You have to develop relationships. And you've got to learn to trust, to delegate, to do what only you can do. And so that takeaway is always that dynamic is always a little bit of that, the famous Tuckman, form, norm, storm, perform, all that always happens out there.
I love this idea of, really kind of looking at the team and figuring out where your superpower shines, or where, your best fit in terms of the larger group. But I love this idea from Jeff, or this question from Jeff, that if you are an entrepreneur or a consultant or a contractor, or maybe you're a division of one at your company and you don't have necessarily like an entire sales team, you're just one person in the sales team, how can you kind of build that grit or build that self-reliant attitude if it is just you?
Yeah. Well, the whole idea of self-reliant leadership came to me when I was a teenager soldier, and I was cold, wet, tired, and hungry. And then, I'm in patrol, and one of my peers is the leader, and all of a sudden the instructor says, that leader's gone, you're now in charge. Well, you couldn't be in charge of other people if you weren't squared away. If you were a bad follower, once you were put in leadership, nobody was going to listen to you and make you look good. So you had to be squared away. And the best way I can describe it is, to be self-reliant is to be reliable to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a personal responsibility to, like if we're climbing a summit, we've gotten up early, we've done our hygiene, we've eaten, we're fueled, we've got our water, our tent's packed up. Nobody's worried about us, but there's always somebody that needs help. Their little campsite looks like a yard sale. And the same thing happens in the work world. There's always somebody. And again, what we hope happens with a team is everybody has a shared sense of duty, like that I don't want to be that guy or that gal. Like, I don't want to be that person that can't be counted on. And so, you've got to role model that at the beginning, and it's sort of follow me. But as you move up in leadership, it's kind of, you've got to lead from behind, where the team basically says, hey, we did it ourselves, that you were sort of the invisible hand.
I love this talk. I love this because this is so juicy. I want to dig into this for a second. I would think if we're working on becoming reliable, that is a quality that is not contained to the workplace. So it's really becoming reliable in your personal life, in your work life, friendships, family, work coworkers, no matter who it is. Do you find that there is work to be done? I guess sometimes I think people focus so much on the workplace that point you made so much about becoming reliable, that's something that people can work on the weekends, like being a reliable sibling or family member.
Well, I just had a coaching call this morning where we were talking about, what I see, especially at the senior levels, that if people haven't taken care of the home front, then the work front's a mess. And we talk a lot about mental health, a lot. And there's a book out there that, the body keeps score.
Yes, I
Eventually,
just got to
if
reading that.
if yeah, eventually, if we're not taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's going to come back. And it might start where, we've got some things going on in our head. Eventually, that's going to manifest itself, and then we're not going to be able to take care of anyone. And the whole thing about self-reliant leadership is really that this discipline, that you've got to be gritty, that you've got to be squared away, that it's not about you, it's about you serving other people. And part of it is, at the very beginning, you got to be squared away. You got to take care of yourself in all those regards, so that you can take care of other people throughout your life. And my wish, that I would love to see change in the work world, is so many people view work as a transaction. I give you time, you give me money. And I would love for us to get back to, no matter what you do, you are helping other people in some way, shape, or form. That's something that we all get to do, not that we have to do. And I don't care what the job is, you should be able to find purpose and meaning in it. And it's not only up to you to find it, but it's up to the leaders to help people find real purpose and meaning in their work and in their life, and so they can bring all that they bear to, basically live a life in the service of others.
I love this idea of really not only living in service of others, but really kind of doing your own work first, like working on yourself first. I always love the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I love that you mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I just read that last month. I thought it was really beneficial. And I also like this question from Javier. If there are people joining today that are about to take on a leadership role, in this case, he's taking on a new position, which congratulations, Javier, as a plant manager. What are some other books, obviously, besides your own, which Javier, you should definitely pick up, that you have really leaned on in the last maybe 10 years before you had your own book, as maybe a homework assignment for these teams that you were working with? Was there any kind of advanced reading, or maybe after you're working with them, kind of like homework reading that you had them do?
Yeah. Great question, Javier. Gosh, the old books by Kotter, Kotter. There's some great books out there, but probably the one I would recommend the most is by Dr. Robert Cialdini, Influence. He's been on our podcast a couple of times. There's people that have said, this is the answer key to human relationships. So I would recommend that. Of course, I would recommend, which is really dated, 1936, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'll give you the summary, Javier, of that book, which I think is the best advice for being a leader, is to be interested versus interesting. In other words, the whole thing about leadership, it is not about you. And when we think about leading and communicating, it's about really listening. And in the old days, people all were motivated kind of similarly. They wanted to get promoted. They wanted to make a lot of money. That's not the case anymore. And I think as leaders, and this is kind of crazy talk, but I think as leaders, we're used to setting expectations and directives. I think we've got to really put on our negotiating hat and really think about, geez, here's my 5 priorities. I want these to be yours. And you got this pet project over here. I'm going to let you keep it because I know that provides purpose and meaning. And I'm going to compromise, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to understand what drives you, what you fear, and help you get what you want so you can help me get what I want. And it's not about command and control. So long answer to the question, Javier, on a whole bunch of leadership topics, but hopefully that helps.
I love this idea that you just said about really being collaborative in the workplace, and also maybe keeping a pet project or two that you are passionate about. And for me, that is a double-edged sword because I not only love a pet project, I'm infamous for taking on too many projects. My husband is always like, no more volunteering, no more, because I'm a yes person. And especially when I'm in the room, I'm excited, right? Like, we're saving dogs. I
Yeah.
like dogs. Let's save more of them. Yes, of
Yeah.
course I will do that. I'm a yes, of course person. And then I get home later and I'm like, ooh, perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps I've relied on myself a little too much and gotten myself a little in over my head. And it's a similar situation, I think, to Liz. If you have found yourself, you're kind of super self-reliant, like you're like, yes, I got this, I'm taking care of business, boom, boom, boom. But then you maybe find yourself in a period where you're like, uh-oh, I have overestimated my own self abilities. What is a good way to kind of, I don't know, what advice do you have to kind of ask for help or reevaluate maybe how
Yeah.
self-reliant you are being?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And Liz, I wouldn't ask for feedback, first off. I kind of go with Marshall Goldsmith, who says, ask for advice or suggestions because that's safer for people. But
Mhm.
where I would go, in all of us, we all think we're great drivers. We're all average. We think we all have great self-awareness. We don't. And I really think of self-awareness in three ways. And this is where you can ask for help, Liz, is, hey, I know how I am. Maybe it's like I'm not patient. True. The second is, do I really know how that affects other people? How it affects their feelings, their behaviors, their attitudes? Do I really understand how my impatience affects other people? The downstream effect. And do I have the emotional wherewithal to self-regulate and deliver a response that's best for the people around me? Well, if I know I'm not patient and I know I'm not as self-aware as I could be and how it affects other people, then what I might do is say to Kim, "Hey Kim, I'm not very self-aware. I'm not very patient. What advice or suggestions do you have?" You reply, I say thank you. A week later, I come back, great advice, suggestions. Do you have any more? Well, what you're going to tell me is going to be feedback, but I've asked for advice and suggestions because
Mm.
you're going to basically go in your mind's eye and go, what have I observed? So I think that's where we can all get a little bit better is when we're in a meeting and we think about how everybody affected us and what they said, and somebody got on my nerves and I really like this or that. We don't usually leave a meeting and think, how did I affect the meeting? How did I affect other people? What did I make them feel or think? And we do that on the Crucible, climbing a mountain all the time. The directions, the top of the mountain, the pace is as fast as the slowest person. And then at the top, we'll get up there and we'll go, how does the team feel? Oh, they're spent or they're motivated. They're ready to go do another mountain. Well, were you intentional about how you wanted people to feel when they're led by you? That's a hard thing.
Well, and really kind of again, how the group feels because of what you did, really emphasizing that point you made earlier that Scott highlighted, which is when somebody leaves a meeting with you and they feel like you were really interested in them,
Yeah.
interested in their ideas. That is so much more powerful than just saying, oh, I did such a great job in that meeting. I, said 5 fun facts that were
Yeah.
like super snazzy. That people think about that a little less than really how you made them feel walking out of that
Yeah.
meeting.
Well, I'll ask leaders all the time. You've got this meeting, and they'll say, "Hey, Jan, here's the agenda. What do you think? What do you think?" Like, what do you want the outcome to be? Well, I want them to do X, Y, Z. Okay. How do you want them to feel? Inspired, enthusiastic, a little bit on their heels, and that was Scott that put that up. Scott, I'll tell you the best advice I ever got and I can ever give is from my mentor. And this is it. People support what they help create.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
it. You want to be an effective leader, in the back of your mind, you have to remember people support what they help create. And that's hard because you have to give up control. And you know how many people have control issues? And you have to trust people. How many people have trust issues? You have to do two things that are really hard: give up control and trust people. And again, they could take you off in this direction, and can you pull them back? But I'll tell you what doesn't work. The knife edge. You know that that just it didn't work 30 years ago. It certainly doesn't work today.
No, it never does. And it really, it's not only about the teamwork, I think, for people that are kind of on your same level, or maybe even you being the leadership of the team, but I think it also plays a big role in you and your relations with your superiors. And if you're in a corporate job, obviously that's very clear. It's your boss or your boss's boss or whoever. Or even I'll give myself as an example as an entrepreneur. I'm in a client-based business. My bosses at the end of the day are my clients, because they're the ones that are making the decisions that affect me at the end of the day. And so I definitely want to touch on a meets question here, which is when we're thinking about managing up, understanding that it is a team dynamic, and that team includes your boss, or that team includes somebody who's making decisions about you. Is there a different process for that, as opposed to working with people that are kind of more of your equals, or people that you yourself are leading?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is, gosh, so much of my time as an executive coach is spent on this question. So much. So here's a couple of things. One, your boss is the most important person that you work with. They're your number one client. You serve at their pleasure. And you were brought on basically for a couple reasons. This is the hard fact. Number one is to make their job easier, to keep their boss off their back. That's a big part. The second, you've been brought on to produce more value than you cost. That's the calculus. So when you're managing up, again, especially if you have a difficult boss, what I've said to other people is think of them more as a client. Because if they're a client, with clients, I have no expectations that they're going to remember my birthday. They're going to remember my kids' names, what car I drive, my favorite sport. I don't have any expectations. If it's your boss, we have crazy expectations about bosses that they can't meet. So, again, managing up is really trying to understand their problems and challenges. So instead of always having an agenda of, hey, here's all the things, here's all my priorities, here's the resources I need and the obstacles cleared, understand what would make their job easier. What are they dealing with? Because that, again, you are there to make their job easier. And, and if you have a good relationship with your boss, then you can get resources for your team. You can clear obstacles. If you don't have a good relationship there and you only have a good relationship with your team will be frustrated with you that you have no power and influence in the organization.
Oh, 100%. And at the end of the day, that power and influence directly affects you and directly affects the rest of your team. So they all have a vested interest in that as well.
Yep. It's hard. The other thing to remember is, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are bosses that, don't have a lot of leadership development training. They were really good at their job, or they worked really hard. It's kind of like the professors we had in college. They all were smart, but not all of them were good teachers. Your boss is probably a hard worker, probably smart. Doesn't mean they're an effective leader. And sometimes, if we're a leader, we have to lead them. We have to help them. And, you have to have a really great relationship with them. And, again, they're difficult and they have a perspective that you do not have. Where they sit, it's different. And you have to appreciate that they have a different perspective. They have different priorities than you do.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, is really kind of keeping in mind, what can you do to make either your boss's life easier, or going back to that sort of, you can only move as fast as your weakest link, or you can only go as far as your weakest player. figuring out what can I do to help that weakest link, help that weakest player, move forward with the rest of the team. But I will also expand on that and say, not that anybody's asking for dating advice, but I will say, even in my marriage, being able to ask my husband and say, what do you need help with this week? What would make your week go better? And that could be something as, what would make my week easier if I had really healthy snacks that I'm going to be really kind of in and out this week. Those would really make my life a lot better or more productive. Small things that, people can count on you for. And so I think
Yep.
it bleeds through whether it's work or personal life. And that, I think, is a huge takeaway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're pointing to something, Kim, that, none of us are going to be successful alone. I
No.
don't care if you're an entrepreneur. I mean, I'll bet you if you counted, Kim, all the people around you that either, that are 1099 that you pay, or people that are just supportive, I'll bet you it's 40, 50 people. If you counted everybody, LinkedIn people, all, and I mean, all those relationships are really important. And, you can't just go to them when you need stuff. You've got to be a net giver, than just a taker. And, all the people we've had on the show that talked about networking, every single one of them said the same thing. You have to enter into relationships figuring out what you can give, not expecting anything in return. And I think, that applies to the work world. And again, that's about adjusting your expectations about the people that you work with. The reason we get frustrated at work is it's misaligned expectations. We expect this and we got this. They expect this, so they got this. And we get really frustrated. We haven't had the conversations at the beginning to align on those, but the expectations are kind of out of whack. And again, it doesn't mean we don't uphold high standards for the people that report to us. But when it comes to peers and bosses, that's where people have the most trouble. It's not with their direct reports, because they have authority. People are going to, quote unquote, mostly do what they're asked.
I could not agree more. And really, I think Stanley summed it up really well, which is, employees don't last with bad bosses.
No.
You really have a direct cost to you if you do not learn, these leadership skills. If you do not invest in your own learning and your own self, it's not just, it's not this self glorification of like, oh, I'm just, it's all about me. No, really working on yourself and working on your own leadership styles and working on your own relations to your teammates or to people that are working under you. That's going to have a direct effect of if you have a team that is going to stand by you and is not going to get 6 months in and go, man, let me freshen my resume and, get me the heck out of here.
Well, was it Stanley?
Stanley.
That, you're 100% right. When we interviewed Jeff Pfeffer, who's a pretty great expert on power and influence and a professor at Stanford, he indicated that the single best metric about a leadership's effectiveness is retention. I mean, if people continue to follow you, you're doing something right. And so a question I would put out to all of you listening, and this is a hard question, is to look in the mirror once in a while and ask yourself, am I easy to follow? Do I make it easy for people to follow me? Or is there tons of ambiguity? Or am I wishy-washy? Or am I back and forth, hot and cold? I hear all the time about, especially founders, that they parachute in and then they leave, and then they parachute, it's like they're really super engaged, micromanaged, and then they disappear for 3 weeks. Then they come back in, and there's bosses that are like that too. But again, we have to control what we can control. And again, remember, none of us control other people. At the best, going back to Cialdini, we can influence them, but we can be easy to follow. We can be unambiguous. We can remember that people support what they help create. We can listen and get their input and find out their fears, their drivers, their wants, their needs. And we might not meet all of them, but at least we've listened. We show we care, we've shown compassion.
Absolutely. I'm curious, for you as you dug into creating this book and really reflected on, the last decade of digging in deep with a lot of these issues and learnings, was there anything that came to the forefront that you said to yourself, the minute I start working with somebody, whether it's an executive coaching situation or a team, and I see this one thing, that sort of sets off red flags in my mind that we have to address that, or we have to dig into that? Is there one thing that kind of you see it and you just immediately know we got to get into this because this is going to be a big problem?
Well, I think it's a lack of curiosity. I see it, I work with a lot of veterans who are transitioning out in their mid 40s. They've had a stellar career, and they want to get out and they want to solve problems. And what they really need to do is be really curious. And even when they think they've got the solution, is keep asking questions. Keep asking questions. You probably get this, Kim. A lot of people want to have coffee with you. They want to chat. They want to pick your brain, right? But
Yes.
when a lot of these people that want to pick your brain, I'll bet you a majority of them don't pick your brain. They tell you what they want. Like, here's my resume, here's what I want, here's all the stuff I want. And they really never got around to asking you any questions that would help them gain insight into, the trials and tribulations you've been through and the hard-earned wisdom you've earned. So
Totally. I think
what's it for you?
I think for me, the biggest sort of unlock with that sort of, pick your brain, or can you talk to me, or do you have 30 minutes, or can I ask you these questions about, whatever it is. My best sort of unlock was from that. And if you know me, well, you know this unlock already, but I'll say it again, which is I would give people homework. So I would say, I would love to have a 30-minute coffee with you. I would love to do XYZ. Why don't you read, this news article or read this book or whatever it is? Because I think that will answer a lot of, the questions that you're having. After you've read it, let's have a conversation. Then we can do, whatever it is. And what I've realized is the people that really want your feedback, that are hungry for it, they will do the homework. And the people that are just kind of like, if it's easy and it comes to me, great. But if I have to work for it, maybe I'm not so into it anymore. They won't do the homework. And so it really helped me weed out. That way I'm actually never saying no. I'm actually constantly in the yes business. Yes, I would love to. First, I'd love for you to read this. Then we can have this conversation. And that way, if people don't kind of do the work, it's not me saying no, it's them sort of taking themselves out of the opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. That's good. Yeah. And I just saw I saw a quote. I just wanted to highlight it because it's so good. It's from Catherine Hanaway. Expectations are the breeding ground of future resentments. I love that. Oh, yeah, it popped up.
So good. And I would also say, just to expand on Catherine's point, is really, as much as possible, making your expectations clear, or really overemphasizing your thought process. I think that was another big unlock for me, Jan, when I was thinking about leadership, is really explaining the why. So for instance, instead of just telling someone on my team, hey, I want you to make sure that we have our coffee session with Jan up a week beforehand, instead of just leaving it at that, I would say, because I want to make sure that Jan can share it in his weekly newsletter, or I want to make sure it's up for at least 2 weeks so that people can add it to their calendar, because I know that the last week of September is really busy for a lot of people. Kind of giving that why, I found, is also really helpful, because a lot of times people around you have great ideas. And if you explain your why, that might lead them to say, oh, well, if we're trying to get extra signups for your coffee session with Jan, why don't we also do XYZ? So it kind of helps them develop ideas as well. That was another huge unlock for me that I learned a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna steal that, Kim.
Yeah. Well, we love that. And speaking of stealing, we would love to steal some homework from you. So if you could give us advice. It could be to read something, it could be to do something, download something, watch something. I will selfishly give homework. And that is, I think everyone should pick up a copy of Jan's Self-Reliant Leader book. It's been immensely helpful to me. But if you could give us a homework assignment for the rest of the week that you think would make us better leaders, really dig into our own grit and leadership capabilities, what would your homework assignment for us be?
Yeah, it's not totally leadership specific. It's a little bit more to what's a good life. And that is, so many people that reach out to me are, I mean, we're all in transition in some way or another. We're trying to make a decision about something. And I think the mistake we make oftentimes with decisions is we make a T-chart, a Franklin T-chart, and we look at pros and cons. I think that's a really poor way to make a decision. I think the important thing is to establish criteria upon which we make a decision. And the best way to establish criteria is to really know what you value. So if I know, and I'll just give you my top three, and I spent a lot of time to figure this out a long time ago, but it was family, it was freedom, and it was purposefulness. Any decision I have in my entire life, I can go to those three things, and again, in that order, and that will help me make, a good decision. So I would encourage you, there's tons of places out on the web to look up, a values exercise, but to really spend time and figure out what are the top 3 or 4 or 5 values in priority order, and can you use that to help you make decisions, whether it be about life decisions, whether you want to take a new job, move, but even things at work. And how close do those values line up with the organization's values where you work? And can you make sure that you're making decisions that are consistent with that? Because when I get asked to coach people, it's always one of two things. It has to do with where they spend their time, and they all want to spend it developing people and being more strategic. And then the other part is, how do I have difficult conversations? How do I do that? And again, it always goes back to our values, and where we spend our time is values. So that's the homework that I would give.
I love that homework, and I was going to highlight it, but then Jim highlighted it before I could highlight it, which is, I love what you said about we are all in transition. So we are all transitioning from moment to moment, day to day, from project to project, job to job, kind of shedding ourselves like a snake sheds its skin. And I think that that's also kind of its own, I don't know, blessing and curse to kind of sink into, but to really understand that we are all in a transition period all the time, and to really take some grace and reflect on that.
The funny thing about writing a book, the number one question I get is, what's next? It's like, I just got this book done. I don't have a what's next. But it's a funny, thing. But yeah, we are all in transition. But again, on the Crucible, we're out there and we talk about leadership. We do the digital detox for the executives. We help military veterans figure out a new vocabulary. But it always goes back, a bunch of strangers getting out there where they have nothing to prove, protect, or promote. And they always go back to talking about what's a good life. What is a good life? And, it's about, and then it goes back to family. And it goes back to what we all grapple with is, how do I balance time for my family? And how do I make a certain amount of money where we have options? And what's crazy is, at the beginning, we want to spend all this time with our kids, but we need to make money. And then at a certain point, the kids will grow up. And do you have options in your career that you can do other things? Or did you sacrifice everything and now you have less options? So, I mean, this is always the yin and yang of these big decisions. And if you're making these decisions based on what you hold dear, then that's a lot easier to live with than if you're, creating a T chart and doing pros and cons.
No, it's such a great framework to look and a lens to really look at things on. And I'm glad that so many of us are really taking it into account. Liz is saying, like, I'm looking for a new job and I have to, keep this in mind, really kind of where my values are and what does a happy life look like. And I think that that's so important, whether you are like Liz and you're kind of making a more noticeable transition to a new role, or you are like me and perhaps taking on different projects or saying yes to things, and really just always coming back to running it through that lens of where are my values and does this fit within my value structure? I think that's a wonderful homework assignment for all of us, Jan. So thank you.
And the other thing I would add real quick, Kim, is, early in my life, I had jobs, really crappy jobs. It would be really fun to talk about in another episode. And then I had a career, first in the military, then the business world. And what I have now, I wish for everybody, and that is a calling. I mean, don't tell my clients, but I would do what I'm doing now for no money. I really would. And my daughter recently said, "Dad, are you going to ever retire?" And and she said, "What would you do?" And I said, "Well, I'd help people. I'd work with veterans." And, she goes, "That's what you do.
Yeah.
You're basically not going to retire." And I'm like, "Well, that's because I found it." And that's what I wish for everybody, that you get to that point where it all blends together and you get to help people.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Jan. If people want to keep learning from you, keep absorbing more of this goodness, more of this great advice, what is the best way that they can kind of keep learning from you and keep up to date with all the new things that you have going on?
Well, LinkedIn, of course, there, and then my website, self-reliantleadership.com. And I have tons of resources. All you have to do is ask. I can refer you to a podcast episode that covers a topic that you're probably dealing with. I've got lots of online courses and videos and all kinds of stuff. So just let me know. We've also created a little workbook to go along with our book, to create discussion with teams. So if you're interested in that, just send me a note and tell me you got the book. I'll believe you, and I'll send you the PDF to go along with the book and send that over to you. But Kim, thank you. Thanks for doing what you do. I mean, you really are an extraordinary interviewer, and I'm not just saying this to patronize. I mean, you are really good, thoughtful, compassionate. You care about the people that are, the audience and what their contributions. You are just so good, and you're making you're bringing, like, literally rays of sunshine into what can sometimes be dreary and the work world. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you, Jan. That's so kind. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate all of you for joining Jan and I today. This was so beautiful and so wonderful. As Jan said, tons of helpful links. We will drop all of those in the show notes. If you are listening to this in podcast form, if you are with us live, we will drop them in the chat so that you have easy access to them. I will be back here next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern with another awesome conversation with my friend Marlene, which I'm really excited for. If you have questions about that, or if you are free to join, I would love to have you. You can just head over to getcoffeewithkim.com and it will magically send you a little calendar reminder so that you can make sure you block off your schedule next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. But Jan, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And I will see you next Wednesday. Bye.